The best work comes from the best partnerships. And if you can start to work collaboratively, forget about spend, obviously be a part of it, but can you work to build and kind of like, I suppose,
something better?
Yeah, we all have the same end goal, right? We both want to build and drive revenue for our brands.
Welcome to the Time for a Reset Marketing Podcast. Insights from global brand marketeers, brought to you by CvE Marketing Consultancy. I'm your host, Paul Frampton, and in each episode, I dive deep into the minds of senior marketing leaders from around the world. Join me as we explore what they want to hit reset on in an ever-changing landscape and uncover strategies that drive successful brand transformation. Welcome back to another episode of Time for a Reset. I'm joined by Paul Stafford. Paul and I first met actually at a Twitter event before it was ludicrously renamed as X many moons ago, where we both received in the same year a Twitter Lifetime Achievement Award, even though I think we both probably agree that we're far too young to get a Lifetime Achievement Award, but we both ended up on stage there. And I've seen Paul many times at recent retail media commerce events. So Paul has spent a lot of time on the digital marketing e-commerce side, worked at brands like Virgin and Pepsi, where he played a pivotal role in the in-housing team at Pepsi. Then he moved over to Superdrug, firstly in the e-commerce and digital marketing team, and then moved to run and set up the retail media division, which is what he's been doing most latterly and what we're probably going to spend most of the conversation talking about, because as you know, on Time for a Reset, we've dug deeply into retail media, particularly in the UK, and the differences between the UK and the US. We've had many retail media leaders on. So Paul, really, really good to have you here.
Hey, thanks for having me. Yeah, that was fun. I remember that very well. And we were just chatting before this. We both got our custom made emoji pillows. If you want to show yours to everybody.
I'm not sure if that's going to end up in the final episode, but we'll see.
We'll see.
So, Paul, we always start in the same place, which is if you had a big orange button on your desk in front of you, what would you reset in the industry?
Within retail media specifically, we're 3 years into this journey, just over 3 years in. And what has become really, really kind of like clear now is that it's not just a conversion sort of bottom of the funnel opportunity. Absolutely, what I see now is that retail media can really build brands. It doesn't have to be mass reach TVC, but it can fit into that. But I absolutely see, and even through the kind of the course of the briefs that I'm getting, that we're being asked to sort of help solve brand challenges, right? Yeah, brand on a conversion end, but how can I build NPD awareness? How can I build audiences, which is the absolute accelerator for that mid and upper funnel piece? How can I bring my audience opportunity of that huge amount of first party data to help build brands? So that's sort of like digital pointed, targeted view, but to bring that to a scalable model. And we're really well placed to do that. So if I had to reset that, if I had known how important that would have been at the start, I would have spent more time focusing on it, right? We're not backtracking now by any means, but we have such a heavy focus on that now. We've kind of netted out on what we can do from that conversion on-site piece, but the opportunity, the model that you see in almost every sort of like, whatever area you work across market digital, there's an iceberg, the top of that iceberg is the conversion bit, but then it's off-site and in-store and building brands through retail media. So that's my reset.
Very good. I think it's always interesting that often new areas or distribution channels start in a place where it's easy to prove it, don't they? And I think starting at the bottom of the phone, it's a bit like where digital marketing per se started, right? That it was easy enough to prove that things like search and then latterly paid social worked. But then you suddenly started to bring kind of more traditional type of advertising, billboards on the internet, and everyone was like, well, it didn't drive a click, therefore it can't actually do anything. It can't be as valuable. And of course, all advertising ultimately is there to drive sales, especially, I imagine, most of the customers that Superdrug works with, they have products stocked in your stores, presumably with the purpose of selling them as regularly as possible to customers. So it's kind of interesting how the industry gets slightly caught up in this top of the funnel, mid funnel, bottom funnel, brand performance. Is it conversion? Is it consideration? It's really just, is it the right touch point at the right time for the customer? And I think that's what you're kind of saying, and what I've heard a few other retail media leaders saying, that obviously the easy place to start was when you had all of these traditional kind of shopper marketing type approaches, which were very proven, was to prove that retail media in digital would work just to drive additional conversion into the basket or drive sales up. But it obviously depends on what data you're using and at what point someone is in the funnel. So I think it's kind of a bias that we have to always look towards, can you prove it works in the short term, isn't it?
Yeah, well, that's it exactly. I mean, look, like you say, it's so easy for you as a brand to run a campaign with me on site. And at the end of the week, I can say it 100% drove 5 sales or 10 sales or whatever. Although there obviously is a bit of scrutiny in that where the incremental sales are up, but we won't get into that. You're right. It's so easy just to start at that bottom layer. But like you say, kind of like all advertising has a role in ultimately driving sales, but it gets more complex. The measurement, the further you get away from something that's kind of tactile, like clickable or whatever, whether if you're like saying exposed to an in-store radio ad, right? So how do you start to measure that as well? But that's absolutely part of a future retail media suite. But yeah, start where it's easy, low-hanging fruit, whatever you want to call it. But also, I suppose, like the point of us starting with the on-site bit as well is like kind of replicating that Amazon model, which is what we know is driving a lot of growth in the industry. All our CPGs are working heavily kind of like large Amazon teams, large investment in those teams. So I just want to replicate that as well, right? So it makes perfect sense.
It does make perfect sense. And so maybe if we just take a step back for a second, because I mean, a lot of people will obviously know Superdrug as a UK high street brand, but they may not know that Superdrug is part of a much bigger group, A.S. Watson, that is global and has, I think, something like 16,500 stores. And obviously you're owned by a Hong Kong business, Hutchinson. So can you just talk a little bit about how connected Superdrug is into that and why, I guess, the retail and the digitization and retail media strategy is so important to what you're doing and I guess the overarching group?
Yeah, so yeah, you're right. I mean, like for those that don't know, A.S. Watson's probably one of the biggest companies you've never heard of, right? It's particularly if you're outside of Asia. If you've been to Asia, you will, I remember from my backpacking days, right? You're in Malaysia or Singapore, you will definitely go into a store called Watson's. They're just everywhere. It's like a nice green sort of sign with just Watson's on it. And they're sort of like a replica of Superdrug to an extent across Asia. So that footprint is huge. They also got a huge footprint in China. Over here in Europe, they have it's a independent BU level. So here in here in the UK, we've got the perfume shop Savers and Superdrug. We're all the same family. We work a lot together, work closely together. In the Netherlands, you've got Kruidvat, which is sort of the number one beauty retailer in the Netherlands. And then there's EC Paris. And then across Central Europe, you've got Marionnaud France, which is sort of mastige, kind of a step up. So yeah, it's a huge organization, which we work together with those BUs weekly, daily, depending as well. There are COEs, Center of Excellence, driving different agendas. The advantage of scale that we take place kind of like from maybe transformation systems as well, tech as well. You might implement a tech at a sort of like central level, and then that's easier to spin across so we can move at pace like that as well. Then from a retail media point of view, more to your kind of question as well, look, retail media in China and A.S. Watson has been around for quite a while. And in fact, they are so far advanced. Anytime we meet them and stuff that they're doing is they've got a huge team in China. I don't exactly know the numbers, but like they're doing everything from advanced measurement, full TV down to conversion planning. Anything you want, you can get from that team, right? So I suppose, and then it's kind of filtering out through a bit of Asia. So I don't know exactly when that was set up, but that's been set up and running effectively. At the same time, over here in Europe, we've obviously seen the likes of like Boots setting up over the past few years. And then the retail media industry is where your time at CvE is really just accelerating. So we have a lot of sort of like, pressure, a lot of requests from the L'Oreal's this world. When are you setting up your retail media team, right? So those two kind of things, we have the China bit, we have the request bit. And then obviously then it's just like, it's such a massive opportunity for a retailer like Superdrug, right? If we were a pure player, it might be different. If we were just .com, it might not be such a huge opportunity, but we have 800 stores across the UK. That's a huge footprint. We're number one in some category. It's a massive opportunity for us to play in. So it comes to all those things had just been like a perfect sort of like lead in. We start working on this about 3 years ago in Europe. It's not like something you can just turn on overnight, right? It's like it's cultural change, it's digital transformation, it's process, it's establishing up new teams, it's new technology stack, all those different things that need to be figured out. You got to run RFPs. Some of those RFPs are local, some of those are European level. all those different things. You got to kind of like change your capability. There's some, I could speak to you for hours just on that topic. So anyway, you were kind of working across that for X number of years before we went live. So yeah, AS Watson have been a massive part in that, driving that at its central level. And now it's starting to filter out into local BU level and start to move at scale. And that's, the real advantage of working for a big global company like that. We might be a little bit later than some of our counterparts, but we're going to move quick now. You'll see that.
No, that's really interesting context. Thanks, Paul, because obviously there are differences and nuances between China, where I know live video shopping seems to work in China, but not in many other places, versus Europe, versus different countries in Europe, like you say, the Netherlands versus the UK. Having that retail business in multiple places does give you some advantage in scaling up your tech and the way you approach data, which I think domestic only kind of retailers will find a little bit tougher, because you won't have the same kind of coffers and investment budgets that you guys might have. I find that quite interesting, because quite often I talk to retail media leaders around, can you invest in the same way that some of the US kind of retailers have? Because clearly the scale and the volume of what they've got is so enormous. And the UK, whilst it's a big market in Europe, it's still comparatively a fraction of what you're going to get if you kind of do it in the US. But I think you guys have got an interesting ability to what it seems to be is be able to play local, be very domestic, because all the brands you talked about are very, very localized, but also lean on the center of excellence global model when you need to.
And that's exactly what's happening as well. So we're learning really fast. We've obviously got our own internal steer codes or whatever. We've got a cadence of sessions where we share best practices. I'll try some. We've failed here, but maybe another BU might have taken a different approach. I can learn from that. Versus if I was just as my own BU with no other help, I'd be like, the mistakes would be harder to pick yourself up from, right? It'd be slower to move. But, I can say over the past 18 months of being fully live, we have just, the benefit of having those guys as a support network has been second to none, really.
And we'll come back to your other point about the different skill sets that you need when you're running a retail media business. I'll definitely ask you more about that later on. Before we get to that, also wanted to kind of go back to some of your other experience. You've obviously worked in other parts of brands, both setting up and running in-house businesses. You've worked agency side, I think, as well. So give me a sense of what those different perspectives of doing digital marketing, e-commerce, looking at it from different parts of the kind of, I guess, almost the ecosystem. How's that helped you kind of do the retail media piece? Because there are some people that have moved into retail media that have only ever been in merchandising or close to shopper, and then they may not necessarily understand how a brand goes to market.
It's a good question. So I think my experience is probably kind of like, there's two ways I think about my experience why it's set me up really well, right? So number one, if I just take it sort of like operational, I've set up, for all intents and purposes, a media agency, right? So it's a new function. It's like a media planning function and a media sales function, right? We're an outbound, which is, like I say, a big cultural shift for a traditional retailer, because we're not really a media capability engine. We have obviously best-in-class marketeers internally, but like doing that for clients is not being our sort of like core kind of skill set, versus then obviously the kind of sales and driving revenue through this as well. So I've gone through that and understanding. I set up a creative and media planning agency at PepsiCo called Sips and Bites, who you may be aware of. But setting up a function like that from the ground up, I knew exactly the challenges, the levels of pushback, who would go for it, time to do it, all the kind of little things about kind of like finance processes. A lot of it's just been reminding me of the legal processes, the compliance stuff. So all the things that build sort of like what you call a networked agency in a highly matrix stakeholder-led organization. I knew that, right? And look, I'm not saying that it made it easier, because it's definitely not easy, but I knew kind of like what to expect. So that's maybe kind of from the operational point of view. And then I suppose from the other side as well, just from a capability point of view, again, just my time at Pepsi probably did two roles I did there. First was sort of like a brand digital role. I've never really worked in e-commerce per se, right? My roles have always been brand, but like digital brand focused. So at Pepsi, kind of like the main remit when I came into Pepsi was data-driven digital, right? And the big challenge for a global brand like Pepsi or L'Oreal is that, like, yes, they have access to all the digital activation platforms, but you're not really You don't have the scale of first party data. You don't have transactional data, right? Which is, if you want to have data driven digital, you really have to have that large chest of data to build from. So I understand the stresses and strains from a Pepsi point of view on how to activate a data driven mindset at scale, but also kind of like just knowing how to plan, because Pepsi plan the same as, to an extent, as P&G. They plan the same as that to Unilever. So I understand everyone has the how brands grow playbook built into them, right? So like, Byron Sharp is just drilled into your DNA from almost day one. But then on the other side, then as well, got to the in-house agency bit as well. Like, I'm not a media, that's not my background at all, right? But like working with an in-house media planning team, we divvied up the digital work between OMD. So understanding the mechanics of creating plans, how that works within an agents and a total connections planning unit, all those sort of things, kind of just really helped me understand that, okay, I'm now running a media capability function. I'm also kind of trying to run a day-to-day sales function. I'm trying to understand and kind of like almost second guess where a request might come in. Why are they thinking like that? I'm thinking like a retailer, but let me think like a big brand. They're always trying to get reach and scale. That's always at the top of their mind. And I suppose that's sometimes, which I think I kind of like have a good grasp, can be a bit conflicting for some of these guys. You've got like, on one hand, I got to drive mass reach, but digital and audiences by their very nature are small and not niche, but like you have now have multiple narrow audience trying to drive. Yeah. So there's that kind of fine balance, which I think I have a good understanding. So I think those sort of areas, and I think my time at Virgin, I think Pepsi has really been the one that set me up best for this, to be honest.
Yeah, no, it's really interesting because at the end of the day, most retail media has either been bought direct by a brand, and you're having those conversations with how they're merchandising across in-store and online, or it's coming through an agency. And actually, you've got good experience of both of those environments. So I can see how that's kind of stood you in good stead. You talked in your reset, Paul, about the fact that retail media should and can do much more than just drive conversion and can operate in terms of building brands. But probably most retail media networks have struggled to kind of gain those dollars yet today. So how do you think the industry is doing, maybe the UK industry, because that's the one you're closest to, because I'm not even sure it's happening much in North America, if I'm honest. How well do you think the industry is doing at building that story? Like, I had Amir from Nectar on here a few months ago, and he said a similar thing about this. And I know that people like you and him talk about this a lot, but is the industry at large, i.e. all of the retailers, making that case, or are some just trying to take what they can at the bottom of the funnel?
Well, I think it's probably twofold. I think everyone's trying to take what they can, right? Because we're fighting, scrapping, whatever. My job is to get onto a media plan. First and foremost, I've got onto a media plan, get budget, and then run an effective campaign, right? I suppose the opportunity, and look, there's a lot of conversation in the industry about it. Actually, I have a good stat, right? I was speaking to the trade desk recently, and they were saying that 50% of all retail media briefs that they're getting at the moment are to activate CTV, connected TV, right? So that tells you where we're going, right? Whether it's all happening or not, you can talk the talk, whether you're walking the walk, whether that's happening now or in the future. But like, I suppose with CTV on the incline, with budgets moving towards retail media, that's only going to be commonplace. And I suppose my view on it is the retailers that will win are the ones that get their audience proposition right. So, we're spending a lot of time trying to understand how we build a really sophisticated audience machine, whatever you want to call it, right? How can I respond to a brief from a CPG? We have NPD. We're going to go on. We want a full funnel activation. How can you be present at every touch point? And then how can you give us that full measuring piece? Now, I think the full measuring piece for us is going to be a stretch away, but it'd absolutely be us feeding in those audiences bit and potentially working with like a data science team at either an agency or even at the CPG. It will really I think that's the area where we're going to see a lot of acceleration in the next couple of years for sure. And like I say, there's one brief we have from one global brand, which is there are 6 KPIs, one that we call ROAS, almost a secondary KPI. They're all brand building pieces, new to brand, new to category. Say, how do we build all those stuff?
Interesting. Yeah, no, I think you're right that it's inevitable it's going that way. And I mean, if you're a CPG brand, you know that there's a certain amount of wastage. And you mentioned Byron Sharp earlier. There's almost a little bit of friction between be everywhere, be salient, have mental availability, and, well, how about I just target the people that are either in market or have a propensity to be in market in a period of time, because they're probably more likely to convert. And I've always thought there's a midway point between those worlds, whereas the advertising landscape is always like, well, it's all just, you don't need targeting, or it's all target people in a barrel. And it's like, well, The world's not that simple, right? Smart strategists have got to work out the right balance of those two things. And I think you're right. If the brands that are more sophisticated and come to you with different types of metrics and different kinds of asks that are more omnichannel are the ones that are going to get more interesting solutions from you, because of course people are going to buy the stuff off the shelf, the stuff that's just on-site activation or buy at a CPM. But the really interesting stuff happens when you get around a table and start to go, okay, let's talk about some slightly different kind of types of data partnership and ways that we can bring value to the customer that we're not doing, that exists across the customer journey. And I think that's when it gets quite exciting. There's a danger that some people, which is why I asked the question in the first place, some people just treat it just like media. And I wrote a piece a couple of years ago, which was like, retail media is not media. It kind of is, but if you treat it as media, then you kind of miss the fact that it's not all just about impressions and CPMs. It's actually really about understanding the customer at different points. And I think then it becomes just touch points along the journey rather than what has happened with media, which you and I have both seen, which is, oh, there's a big difference between TV and digital. It's like, well, is there? Is there really these days? I mean, they can both fulfill whatever purpose you want them to, depending on the audience, the context, and what you're trying to achieve.
I mean, long gone are the days when people were saying, Facebook or Meta, or whatever you call it, couldn't build a brand, right? I think kind of like those days are gone. So we know that those channels, Meta, TikTok increasingly, are so important for a CPG sort of like brand growth roadmap these days, rather than just a conversion piece. So absolutely, yeah, I totally agree.
And I want to come back also to your experience when you were at Pepsi, and your view actually of brands building in-house capability. I mean, one of the things obviously my business does is tries to help either retailers or brands build more of their own capability. And some will always rely on their agencies, and some will make big commitments to build in-house capability. And I think retail media space is one of those interesting ones. I think you're seeing some big global brands are building centers of excellence and are really investing heavily in doing it themselves, partly because I think they see the agility, the access to the data should be theirs, and there's almost like a slowing of speed to market if you then have agencies in that process. Whereas there's some that maybe don't really know what capability they need to build and want to rely on pure media buying expertise. Like, how do you think this is going to play out? Do you think it's going to continue like that, or do you expect more brands, particularly with the Amazon thing in the back of their minds, that most agencies haven't been that good at? Do you think more brands will in the future build that capability themselves, and that therefore it changes the relationship they have with their agency?
I think they're like with anything, there'll be levels, right? I think so. From a brand point of view, I'm talking like L'Oreal and those guys. My observation is there's a few different models. You've got like COEs, right? That kind of like try to influence and maybe not centralized budget pot holders. You got to go out to shopper marketing teams or brand teams and say, like, this is where I think you should put the money on. Or then there's another model where you have like a retail media team that actually has its own budget, right? Now, to a certain extent, but there's still a bit of beg, borrow, steal, if you want to call it that. And then you've got trade marketing teams, which we work with as well, who have their own budgets as well. Then you've got in-house teams, which have their own budgets. And then more
kind of messy, isn't it?
Oh, yeah. It's like, I mean, we try and map it out, but it's something new pops up every time. The answer is, I don't think there's going to be standardized. And if you go back to the oil Pepsi, it all depends on from the appetite from the brand, how much they want to invest in. Do they see it as a sure thing? Are they dipping their toes in it? What sort of like, I think I saw a great quote I saw from Charlotte Murphy at Unilever last year was like, what was the quote? Just let me get it. I'm paraphrasing. It was like, retail media is on every brand plan now at Unilever. So that shows you the direction of travel there. So like their setup is really sophisticated, if I'm being honest. They have a great setup, right? So that's on the brand side. But I think it's actually a little bit more difficult for them to try and figure it out, maybe in a couple more years. Then when you get to the retailer side, yes, there are people like SMG, there's people like you guys, Goodway or wherever, that is able to supplant an agency in or whatever. I'm kind of interested to hear that you think it will work quick or that it would slow things down. In my mind, you can tell me, I think getting that external agency and sitting down, you could almost have like a cookie cutter approach. I kind of like cook that out, put it in the oven. 2 days later, I've got offsite, on-site, data proposition, in-store, all ready to go, right? Versus another approach could just build your own, slowly. Win here, do that well, phase 2, phase 3, phase 4. And again, the questions that retailers ask themselves here is kind of like, well, number one, margin, right? That always comes down to like, how much money can we make from model A versus model B, right? And then the second part then is the resource complexity around that. Like, so what level of intensity, time, do we have the endurance to do this? But also, do we have the skills, the expertise? Do we have, how are we going to, you can definitely kind of like seek that third party and bring it in. But me personally, I prefer to build, to be honest. I kind of like the idea of finding out. And that may be because I have the safety of other BUs learning. It might be different if it was just localizing, oh my God, that's a lot for us to handle.
I think it's also good, as we touched on a minute ago, you've got some of that broader expertise about what good looks like. I think to your point, it depends on the nature of what you've been exposed to this point. It depends on, have you got a supportive kind of exec team that's willing to give you space and time to learn? Have you got other business units or other collaborators that you can learn alongside? And then it comes down to your point, how much resources they're available and what does that model look like. But I think it's interesting. I think we're both probably quite agreeing that there's opportunity for more hybrid, interesting models in there to accelerate or build. And to the point you made, the fact that there are all those different places you might get a brief from, unfortunately, there is no one size fits all. And we might want to go, well, what's the ideal new JBP process? But probably that isn't going to exist the same for every different kind of CPG and retailer, even though there probably could benefit from being some slightly more harmonization so that things aren't so different. It's the same with the metrics piece, isn't it? It's like, okay, yes, the IAB is trying to create some standards that make total sense. But equally, you guys versus Boots, you want to have some uniqueness in your value proposition that encourages L'Oreal to talk to you in different ways and invest with you in different ways, surely.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, we have our proposition, Boots have their proposition, and we have our brand heritage. All those things come into our sort of like outbound sales approach or our partnership approach to our brand as well. Yeah, and the JBP piece, that's so interesting because it's such a hot topic, right? And where that'll go in the next years, I don't know. We've got our trade JBPs, we've got online JBPs. Do we have retail media JBPs? Do I have a JBP with a Group M? Do I have a JBP with a... It's just like, I can have 15, 20 different JBPs, hundreds of JBPs per brand, per supplier, per agency, per holdco, whatever. Yeah, it's messy.
If you have too many joint business plans or partnerships, it's going to be a challenge to deliver the same level of partnership in all of them, right? It's just by definition, you see where people have really got to know each other in a partnership and they share and they're open to be able to go, look, this worked, this didn't, can we work? I think that's where some of the most interesting progressive partnerships will come from in this space. But of course, you're working in the new vein of a model that was quite combative between a retailer and a brand in the past. So some of the folks that are in the trade marketing teams are not necessarily quite as collaborative as some of the digital marketing teams. So I think there's an opportunity to change the culture and the way of working as much as there is the operating model.
It will change. The thing about a JBP, really, in my experience, it's not a contract, right? It's not binding, right? So you can spend a lot of time doing a JBP or working through a JBP, but the spend is not committed. The resource is not. There are a lot of sort of like things that are very fluid. And we know during the course of year, brand plans can change. A new launch might get pushed back to the following year and so on. So I think JBPs have the best intentions, but what I find is having that annual plan, right? It's still a JBP in a sense. It's sitting down with a brand and understanding what do you want to achieve in 2025, right? What are your 5 big bets? Roughly give me an idea of what your investment is and kind of what is it that you want to get from us specifically. Do you want more insights, granular reporting? You want to test something, you don't want to put us against somebody, i.e. another retailer. That for me has been like an accelerant actually when we sat down and we said, you know what, let's do this annual plan piece and then understand what we're going to do. And then from that, then I've selected partners where I give beta opportunities, right? And they're not, with a JBP, generally opportunities come with a spend threshold, but I'll find brands that are willing to do and test. That's how things work, right? The best work comes from the best partnerships. And if you can start to work collaboratively, forget about spend, obviously be a part of it, but can you work to build and kind of like
something better?
We all have the same end goal, right? We both want to build and drive revenue for our brands. Simple.
Yeah, no, I like that, Paul. I like that. So this wouldn't be a podcast if we didn't touch on AI at some point. How much are you currently thinking about how AI helps you scale your retail media business? Whether it's in personalizing that ad targeting or kind of helping you build audiences more quickly or predictive analytics or campaign optimization. Are there use cases that you're starting to already act on or areas that you're planning to look at?
I'm going to answer questions like, I don't think about like how is AI going to be I'm not out there looking for an AI driven agent, like a vendor, a tool, whatever that is like just does AI. I need to understand like what is that AI driving, right? So then what I'm looking for really is tools that can help me do all those things, the personalization piece, the reporting piece, the data piece. And I suppose it's to those guys, they're looking at how AI, and in most cases, like an LLM, like a large language model, like it's kind of like whether it's true AI or not. It's like, I suppose it's to those guys to push whatever they're selling in, building, creating, that then has a net end effect on me. To answer, I'm not out there looking for an AI solution. I'm looking for any solution that is best in the market. And generally what's happening with all the solutions or vendors in the market is they're powering and becoming more advanced through AI and LLM. So it's not like directly answering a question. I'm not out there saying to someone like, find me AI. That's the wrong way. Which brands are using AI in the best, most sort of like tactile, tangible way that can afford me a benefit, right? Now, there are some areas that are kind of like there are interesting small startups that have come my way that can, really use AI to help. So there's one, Ocula. I don't know if you're familiar with Ocula. Yeah, they have this really great tool that is able to use their AI machine to enable on-site search, to build a sort of like meta tagging profile and whatever that might be as well. So look, there are tools out there, but I'm not out actively seeking it at the moment.
Yeah, no, you're more thinking about where can it accelerate something or overcome a pain point rather than just include it for the point of including it.
Yeah. I don't have AI as a checkpoint on my RFPs. It's like, I use AI. It's not that way. Yeah.
And before we go on to a couple of more personal questions, Paul, just one last question on what you're building. Like, where do you get the inspiration for what the future of Superdrug retail media looks like? And is there anything you can share about where you want to take the direction of travel?
The inspiration, I look to people like Con Lewis and kind of Andrew Lipsman, sorry. So, great kind of like thought leaders in the space. You're quite good to follow on LinkedIn as well. Like, so kind of, yeah.
I didn't pay him to say that, I promise.
What I really like about the retail media space at the moment, there's a lot of talk, there's a lot of energy, there's a lot of momentum. And if we measure that against AI, right, it's like, yes, it's a shiny new thing, but it's actually very tactile and tangible, right? It's not the metaverse, it's not AI, it's not Roblox. It's almost like a major transformational change in media, right? I don't want to get like too kind of like, whatever granular, but it is, right? It's changing at pace. So the inspiration I take are from kind of the people that I meet when I go to events. I meet and chat with you when, there's just a great networking community to feed off. Where we're going, look, without giving too much away, we have a heavy store footprint, right? So we absolutely want to play in online, offline, in store. Just to give you a bit of context on, our retail media network is called Optimo. I don't have the logo here in front of me, but it's OPTIMO. So O plus O, online plus offline, right? So we really want to bring our store capability to life with all those data points for our suppliers and drive great campaigns.
Great. Makes a lot of sense. So more omnichannel on in-store and online, or in-store and on-site and off-site all coming together. We touched on, like, quite early on in the podcast about how challenging it is to do all the stuff you need to do to build a retail media network. And I've asked this question to everybody I've interviewed, to Dean, to Amir, and a bunch of others around. What are the attributes you think are important for someone doing this job? Because to me, it strikes me as it's one of the most exciting jobs out there right now, because it's very commercial. You're building a business, almost like a business within businesses. But then you've got the challenge of the fact that you've got to be kind of good at sales, good at building products, good at building relationships and partnerships. There's a lot to it. What do you consider the most important kind of elements? And second part of the question is, what are the areas that you're working on improving, being vulnerable for a second?
Yeah. So, I mean, this role requires soft and hard skills in abundance, right? So number one, so I've been lucky enough to build this from the ground, from idea to see it go live, right? Resilience, just resilience, patience, the ability to be like a really good listener and hear other points of view, whether you agree with them or not. The patience bit, the capability, because you got to be, you speak to trading teams, they don't have that media mindset, that media capability. You got to work on all those things, right? It's kind of very different to Pepsi, because everyone at Pepsi is a brand builder. They're so in tune with marketing. Here it's quite different, right? So resilience, patience, absolutely the two first foremost kind of soft skills, and the ability then to influence as well, to influence at areas that you're not necessarily. I've never really dealt with store teams in any other previous role. You've got to help and try and get them on side, because they have a million things that they want to be doing with their stores, right? You want to be talking to some digital marketing guy about data. You're interested, but you figure that out. And then I think on the kind of the hard skills, I think you're right as well, right? So we talked about some of my background as well. What I see is, yes, there are people from CRM backgrounds, there's people from trading backgrounds, there's people from digital marketing backgrounds, performance marketing, brand marketing, agency planner backgrounds. I think I don't think it's like one is better than the other. I think my observation is that people have actually had a bit more of a broad sort of like scope, if you want to call it that classic T-shaped marketeer, how to build something, how to create a media plan, understand the creative, how do brands grow, build, those sort of things kind of tee you up, because you're face to face with the best marketeers globally. L'Oreal, they know what they're doing. You're working with their agencies. You'll get found out very quickly if you're going in and you're not able to talk to an extent with those guys, right? So they're kind of like the skills I think are going to, and then the vulnerable piece, and you call it out as well. We've spoken about it as well. I'm not a salesman, right? It's like trying to, we can build great plans for you. You can brief me and I know exactly, and I'm so comfortable with that. My new sort of focus is, how do we build a sales mindset? How do we pipeline? How do we connect with people in the right way? How do I not badger people? Who do I take for lunch? It always comes up, because we are, I'm my KPI is revenue, of course, right? So yeah, I have kind of whatever, but how much additional incremental revenue am I driving for the business, right? So the skill that I'm working on at the moment is sales. So how do I become a better salesperson, and how do I in turn help my team become better salespeople as well?
Great. I appreciate that honesty, Paul. Yeah, sales is complicated, isn't it? I mean, you can have a sales CRM tool and see what's going on, but to your point, how often you get involved, what metrics you put in place, and then all of the more leadership things that you put around sales. I always think it's quite interesting that a lot of salespeople get to a point and then they can't grow into an actual sales leader. So I actually think it's, if you've got a T-shaped mindset and a growth mindset and a learning mindset, I think it's actually almost easier to go into senior kind of commercial roles, having done some of the strategy and product building, because I'm not saying it's easy to teach yourself sales, but I think it's very hard when you get to that level to teach yourself value proposition and teach yourself how do you build strong partnerships, because a lot of people are just schooled in the Sandler, Richardson type ways of going and selling, and kind of how to run a pipeline and how to run a target list. But the type of sales leadership that you have to do and how you inspire your teams, I think, is pretty different.
I'm really enjoying it. Like I thought that I wouldn't enjoy the sales element of it, but I do. I really love it. Maybe because it's something new that I've never done before, but it really tests those soft skills, right? So like I say, like financially solid marketeer, all those sort of good things. Adding the sales element onto that as well is sort of super. But I think you're totally right. It'd be much harder to backfit that. If I was a salesperson true and true, how could I backfit my knowledge of digital marketing, performance marketing, all those things? Actually, that's a really interesting point, Paul. Yeah, you got me thinking.
When I ran Havas and then I went to a hospitality tech business and I had a sales team with a sales director and a bunch of salespeople, I was like, wow, what is this new kind of magic, this new kind of discipline? And I learned it there, and it holds you in very good stead because let's be honest, sales is as fundamental as marketing and the two kind of come hand in hand, yet the majority of the time, I think marketeers often look down on sales or can't integrate well with sales. So I think having a sales mindset as well as a marketing and digital mindset actually puts leaders in good stead.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
So look, Paul, we've come to the end of the interview. So thank you so much. Like, you've taken us on a whistle-stop tour of your reset around reframing that retail media can do way more than just conversion. And then we talked about how your background of being in brand, digital marketing, and then moving to retail media has helped you, and how you're kind of learning the sales skills. And I really appreciate the conversation around what's the model going to look like, and the fact that the JBP process or the operating model might well look different for different retailers and CPGs coming together. So I think it just tells us that there's still a lot of change still to come, but there's also a lot of opportunity in this space. And those that are willing to be resilient and test and try and partner, I think, are the ones that are winning. And it sounds like Superdrug is well set up for the future.
Fingers crossed. We hope so. Yeah.
So all that remains is to thank you for your time, sir. I appreciate it.
You're welcome. Yeah, I really enjoyed that. Thanks for having me.
And that's a wrap for this episode of the Time for a Reset Marketing Podcast. Insights from global brand marketeers. Brought to you by CvE's Marketing Consultancy. I've been your host, Paul Frampton, and I hope the insights shared today will help you reset and refine your strategies for successful brand transformation. We'd love to hear from you. If you're enjoying Time for a Reset, please do leave us a comment or a review on your preferred platform, and subscribe to be the first to know when a new episode drops. See you next time as I chat with another senior marketing leader. See you soon. Bye.